Part 27. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 261. Chapter 261 Delaying Pain, General Anesthesia, Local Anesthesia, Spinal Anesthesia. Known, see-through invisibility. You can see the life aura of living things. Asking, what is the aura of life? When it came time to get closer to the answer, Greet calmed down. The subsequent verification work requires sufficiently detailed preconditions. Even when the preconditions are complete, there are still many students who are just getting started, and the experiment fails, the experiment fails, the experiment fails. Greet calmed down and started tinkering with the scales, droppers, beakers, and flasks. With Ren's liquid, weld the zinc sheet and the copper sheet together to make a zinc-copper bow. Well, it would be much more convenient with magic. You can directly burn them until they soften, directly join them together, and directly cool them down. Done. Perfect. Then, Greet began to make the frog, nail the wooden boards, smash the brain and spinal cord, cut off the upper half of the trunk, and complete the sciatic nerve gastrocnemius muscle specimen. The laboratory was bloody, and the barbarians grimaced when they saw it. Only Gretel remained calm throughout, and even looked a little excited. Just kidding, even if medical students are not like their colleagues in biology, they have dozens of frogs, mice, cats, dogs, and various experimental animals that they have killed on their hands. Who would be afraid of such a scene? From the beginning to the end, Gretel even maintained meditation and did not leave the state due to emotional fluctuations. The frog in his hand, shrouded by see-through invisibility, the aura of life flickers silently, falling quietly into the field of meditation. What excites Greet is that even with only a fragment of the spine and frog legs left, a faint aura of life can still be seen in the vision of meditation. So, zinc and copper bow, dipped in Ren's liquid, stimulate the sciatic nerve. The moment the two ends of the metal piece touched each other, the frog's gastrocnemius muscle contracted violently. At the same moment, the brightness of the aura of life in Greet's meditation field of vision jumped up significantly. That's right. See-through invisibility. With this magic, the aura you see is most likely bioelectrical fluctuations. So, what is the mechanism of action of delaying pain? Greet recalled the contents of the physiology textbook. The principle of human body feeling pain is divided into 3 steps. When the body is injured or inflammation occurs, the damaged cells release pain-causing substances, such as inorganic salts of potassium, hydrogen, and calcium ions, amines such as 5-hydroxytryptamine, histamine, prostaglandins, etc. For example, a large proportion of dysmenorrhea is caused by prostaglandins. Taking ibuprofen in advance can inhibit the production of prostaglandins and achieve analgesic effect. Nerve endings are activated by exogenous pain-causing substances or endogenous pain-causing substances, generating receptor potentials, which in turn trigger transmissible action potentials, transmitting injury information along the nerves to the brain. It can be seen that this process is bioelectricity at work. The cerebral cortex integrates the pain information, and finally, the human body feels the signal of pain. So, delaying pain, at which step in this process does it work? Gretel decided to try it again. This time, he followed MRS's teachings and narrowed the scope of delaying pain, narrowed it, and narrowed it again. In the spell model of delay pain, what determines the coverage range of the spell is a structure that is slightly like an hourglass shape. The two ends are not standard cones, but slightly twisted and coiled, with undulating patterns, a bit like ice cream on a cone. This spell model is not too difficult for Gretel, who has experienced in building a meditation shell. Isn't it just distortion? Isn't it just pattern? Everything is a mathematical problem. After a series of calculations, building function models, and adjusting parameters, he was able to reduce the scope of magic from covering the entire human body to the size of a bowl. If we want to shrink again, It's not that the parameters can't be adjusted, but that Gretel's mental power and spell control ability can't support it anymore. Greet took another frog, nailed it to the wooden board, and cut the skin of the leg with a knife. See through the invisible. Delay the pain, target, frog head. In the meditation field of view, the fluctuations of the life aura in the frog's head decrease and ease, but the fluctuations in the legs are still strong. Is it that I can no longer feel the pain, but my limbs are still twitching spontaneously? It's a pity that he has never been able to learn the part of soothing animals in the divine art of nature's religion, and has no way to connect with the animal's perceptions. If only Pastor Matthew were here. Gretel thought for a while, cancelled the spell, and threw the second delay pain to the frog's leg. This time, in the meditation field of vision, the fluctuations of the life aura in the frog's legs calmed down, but the aura in the head was still jumping. There was no way. Gretel used the traditional fixation method, and the frog had nails on its 4 feet, which hurt it. Well, that is to say, the delay pain spell can at least suppress the bioelectrical conduction of part of the pain nerves within the range covered by the spell. So, if what is suppressed is the nerve, is it possible that after the nerve response is cut off, the pain sensation in the terminal limbs will no longer be transmitted to the brain? Greet impulsively threw a spell on his thigh. Then, he leaned down and pinched his calf hard. It really doesn't hurt. Greet kept up his efforts and continued to split the spell models. In this spell, the part that determines the nature of the spell is shaped like a flower. Under the flower, there are countless coiled roots. Greet tried to omit the roots and cast the spell again. The frog struggled violently. However, when the spell was thrown to the frog's head, the frog immediately calmed down, and the life aura on the head also became gentle, and the fluctuations were no longer violent. And omit the flower part, directly outline the roots, and cast the spell again. Effective on the limbs, but not on the head. Interesting. Gretel's eyes sparkled and he recorded quickly, so the flower part is the control center, preventing the brain from recognizing pain, and the root part is the sensory nerve, suppressing bioelectrical conduction? This mechanism is very interesting. Moreover, after splitting and reducing the scope of the spell, the mana consumed by this magic has been directly reduced from the second-level magic to the first-level magic. Such changes are of course not very useful in combat. The smaller the coverage area, the lower the possibility of hitting. If there are multiple wounds on the body, it is even less practical. You can block it here, but you can't block it there. But, medically, that would be so useful. Local anesthesia. Why do you need general anesthesia when you can have local anesthesia? If you can have spinal anesthesia, there is no need for general anesthesia. It's a waste of anesthetics, no, a waste of mana, and it also affects the patient's recovery. Tomorrow, just tomorrow, go to the treatment center and give it a try. If there are no suitable patients in the treatment center, you can also go to the dock or the fleet. The porters and soldiers there have many daily encounters, and they will definitely find opportunities. Thanks to Atoni who loves to play roller coasters for the reward of 1,500 starting coins. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, please review books. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 262. Greet sat in the treatment center all morning. For half a day, the treatment center was completely clean, and not even a person with a cold or cough came to the door. Greet geared up and made all preparations. However, after waiting for a long time, only a sparrow jumped on the threshold, and was teased by the trainee priest sitting at the door to come in and play. Really empty of doors. Well, as a doctor, you really shouldn't expect anyone to get sick or injured. Even if there is no emergency rescue during the night shift, it is worth offering a few apples and 2 more cartons of milk to the night shift god. But, if I had known this, I might as well have done animal experiments at home. Gretel decided to take the initiative. He changed out of his priest's robe, put down his oak staff, put on his magician's badge, and wandered to the fleet station with Bernard. No matter what, as long as the fleet is still parked in the port, someone must be training, and while someone is training, someone will be injured. If it doesn't work, there will always be bruises, right? He was familiar with the roads and walked in through the door of the wounded barracks. In order to test sodium ascorbate, Greet ran for more than 10 days in a row, and he was already familiar with the guard enough to be able to enter and exit with his face. After just saying hello, he and the barbarian walked along the edge of the dormitory to the training ground. The training ground was in full swing. The training ground for the parliamentary fleet is located on the seaside, half water and half land. At this moment, 2 dhows were parked side by side at the pier, with a gangplank set up in the middle. A group of reserve seamen, under the instructor's orders, were busy climbing the masts and pulling the sail ropes. Looking at the movement, it should be one team attacking and one team defending, simulating gang-hopping combat. There was another group of sailors who were older and more roughly dressed. Carrying barrels and wooden boxes, shouting chants 1, 2, 1, 2, and running in circles in the training ground. There were also 2 groups, about 10 or 20 sailors, sitting on longboats on the flat ground, holding wooden oars in their hands, and rowing hard. Hot sweat steamed from everyone's head, and white mist spewed out every time they breathed in. The temperature of the entire training ground seemed to be 1 or 2 degrees higher than that on the sidelines. Greet walked as close to the sidelines as possible. The runners should not be injured, and the rowers should not be injured either. The group that simulated combat seemed a bit dangerous, maybe he should go there and take a look. He walked around carefully. Just halfway through, I suddenly heard an order not far away. Fireball! Lie down! Greet stomped his feet, and before he could see his surroundings clearly, he was thrown to the ground by the barbarian. Ouch! Greet let out a small cry of pain. However, as soon as the voice came out, it was drowned in the frightened scream. Hide quickly! Lord Bishop! Boom! A blazing red fireball went straight up and detonated close to the mast. Apparently the magician in charge of the exercise accidentally missed it. The deck shattered and the hull flew across the ship. The sloop, which was dilapidated and could only be used to train sailors, creaked and fell over, and was about to hit the sailors below. Bernard! Help! Gretel screamed. With a slight movement on his body, the barbarian rushed out like a cannonball and headed towards the mast. However, what was faster than him was a sharp white light. FLA. The white light came first, followed by thunderous thunder, hitting the side of the mast heavily. The oak mast, which was as thick as a bowl, was actually hit by a ray of white light and was deflected by 2 feet, grazing the shocked young trainee and falling with a crash, splashing gravel and dust all over the ground. At the same time, figures shot out from the sidelines of the training ground, and more than one knight rushed out. Gretel even saw that Fleet Logistics Officer William Gunson, who had dealt with him, was also among the crowd, running and shouting. Bishop Upton! Help! Me too, Greet got up and rushed forward. A 7th level war priest, a 7th level barbarian warrior, and 3 or 4 knights took action together. Soon, more than 20 injured sailors were picked up and lined up in a row. 2 were knocked unconscious and fell into the water, 3 were burned in the fireball explosion, a dozen were injured by various wood chips and iron nails, and were bleeding, and some were bruised and smashed. Then, the logistics chief turned his expectant eyes to the bishop. Bishop Upton, please. On the far right side of the queue of wounded soldiers, Gretel is already lying on the ground, pulling Bernard to perform CPR on the wounded soldiers. Young man, who are you? The Lord Bishop asked. Greet raised his head despite his busy schedule. I am also a healer. The one next to you is the most seriously injured, save him first. Good. The god of war bishop had no time to question. He immediately lowered his head to check the condition of the injured and activated the treatment technique. After 4 or 5 consecutive magical spells, 1 soldier who vomited blood, 2 who were severely burned, and 1 who had a broken leg jumped alive and returned to their original state. Bishop Ampton breathed a sigh of relief and looked back at Gretel. "What are you doing?" In the temporary tent, Gretel was shaking out a big green cloth and covering the injured person lying on the long table. "There is an iron nail stuck in his collarbone. I want to take it out," Greet replied without raising his head. As the footsteps turned, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 big green cloths had covered the injured tightly, leaving only a piece of the chest. While still explaining to the injured, "Just lie down. It won't hurt. Don't be afraid. Just lie down and don't move. I won't tie you up, okay?" "Good." A muffled reply came from under the cloth. Bishop Apton became curious and quickly took a look. As soon as he arrived at the door of the tent, he saw Greet take out a small knife, silver light flashing and extremely sharp, and he compared it to the injured man's collarbone. "Wait. You don't even use the magic to relieve pain." The Lord Bishop spoke to stop him. As soon as he said a word, Gretel pointed the tip of the knife at the injured man's collarbone and chanted in a low voice. A wave of spells that were both familiar and unfamiliar fell immediately. He slashed it down. Bishop Upton clearly saw that the injured man lying on the table trembled slightly, but his muscles did not tighten, nor did he let out a sharp cry of pain. "It didn't hurt, it really didn't hurt? Are you delaying pain? Why is it different?" The spell fluctuations are much smaller. The bishop forgot his emotions and asked. He reacted immediately, smiled and waved his hand, indicating that Gretel did not need to answer. However, almost immediately, the god of war bishop opened his eyes wide again and took a few steps forward. "What are you doing? Isn't it just a nail? Why are you cutting his flesh? If you are not sure, I will pull it out." "Don't touch him." The location of this iron nail was too small. It penetrated diagonally below the clavicle, and was inserted between the subclavian vein and subclavian artery. Sloping further to the side, the external jugular vein, suprascapular vein, suprascapular artery, supraclavicular nerve, a bunch of blood vessels and nerves, are squeezed into a ball. Magic detection was turned on, and when he saw the location of the iron nails, he was sweating. It's lucky that the sailor didn't die. He was afraid that the bishop was careless, so he quickly flew the scalpel, cut the skin, and fixed the iron nail with the hand of the mage. Then use the magician's hand to hold the retractor, separate layer by layer, and open the platysma and sternocleidomastoid muscles. With a wave of his hand, several mage hands transformed into blood vessel clamps, and clamped the surrounding blood vessels one by one. "Okay, you can pull it out now." I'll come." Bishop Ampton rushed forward, white light flashed in his right hand, and pinched the iron nail. Greet glanced at it, but without stopping, the bishop pulled it up hard, and with a whoosh, a small stream of blood suddenly came out. Greet had a piece of gauze waiting nearby. Seeing blood flowing out, he pressed on it. Immediately afterwards, he took out a small silver rod and pointed the glass wire at the tip of the silver rod near the wound. Treat minor injuries. Treat blood vessel abrasions. Open the suprascapular artery. No active bleeding. Open the subclavian artery. No active bleeding. Open the suprascapular vein, external jugular vein, subclavian vein. Each mage's hand opened, moved, and disappeared. Greet finally released the hook and leaned back. "No problem. Lord Bishop, I'll leave it to you." I'll do it," Bishop Ampton stepped up to take over. "Hey, you pulled out the nail beautifully. You cut it several times, but there was so little bleeding. Double monthly pass period. Remember to vote for me with your monthly vote. And from today to August 4th, the day after tomorrow, there are crowdfunding monthly tickets from 2000 hours to 2400 hours in the evening. The crowdfunding reward starts with 1,500 coins and there are 4 monthly passes. If you have a reward, please remember to save it until then. Thank you. I feel like the first few chapters are too theoretical and you don't want to read them. From now on, try to write some interesting plots. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, please ask for all kinds of. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 263. Bishop Ampton was filled with emotion. As a ship's doctor, he has also pulled out many foreign objects inserted into the body. Some of them can be treated with minor injuries, while others can cause a stream of blood to flow into the room as soon as they are pulled out. They can only be withstood by high-level magic. The kind of fear I felt at that time was something I never wanted to encounter in my life. But Gretel, although he began to act as if he were facing a powerful enemy, he did not panic at all. Finally, he pulled out the iron nail safely, and the blood that poured out only soaked a piece of gauze. He had a lot of questions to ask. Gretel smiled at him and made a please gesture. Sorry, busy first, there are still many injured people to treat. The Lord Bishop nodded and turned to work. After the treatment of the seriously injured is completed, there are still some scratches and the like, which the soldiers can wash themselves without the need for the priest to take action. Bishop Ampton clapped his hands and returned to see Greet. He saw him sitting on a low stool, facing the soldier's bloody calf. Your bruise is a bit big, don't move. I'll help you stop the pain first, and then clean the wound. He raised his palms. Bishop Ampton's eyes lit up, and he walked to Greet's side, taking 3 steps at a time. Greet's palms were slightly bent, and his fingers were spread out, as if they were holding an egg. It was basically similar to the standard gesture of delaying pain. Then, the palm moved up half a foot and enveloped around the soldier's knees. Familiar yet somewhat unfamiliar fluctuations came. Hey! Bishop Ampton subconsciously wanted to scream. Your delaying pain position is wrong. To release this magical technique, you should aim it at the injured person from a distance and cover him completely, so that he can feel no pain at all and can continue to fight. What do you mean by aiming your spell at his knee? As soon as the words reached his mouth, someone shouted out faster than him. The wounded soldier bared his teeth and twisted his face. Ouch! Greet stopped, his eyes widened slightly, and he looked at him nervously. The soldier shouted twice, then suddenly stopped, lowered his head, and looked at his calf. Hey! Doesn't it hurt? Greet laughed out loud. The soldier also laughed sheepishly. I'm sorry, Pastor, I thought it would hurt. As long as it doesn't hurt. Greet lowered his head with a sullen smile and poured saline solution onto the wound. After pouring half the bottle, he suddenly stopped and pointed at the wound in front of him. Mage trick. An invisible breeze blew past. On the wounded soldier's calf, all the sawdust, dust, pebbles, and flowing blood were swept away, revealing a clean wound, as well as a few sawdust rooted in the muscle that needed to be removed. Can the mage's tricks be used like this? Bishop Apt was surprised. He was stunned for a moment and sighed. The mage is so convenient. Gretel lowered his head to suppress a sigh. The cleaning technique of the mage's trick is really useful. If it were in the previous life, cleaning the surrounding area, disinfecting, cleaning the wound dirt, and thoroughly debriding such a large wound would have taken less than half an hour. With this skill, when he was a junior doctor in the emergency department in his previous life, his efficiency would have at least doubled. He meticulously pulled out the sawdust and disinfected it again. A ray of white light passed by, and under the traction of positive energy, the superficial scratches healed silently. Bishop Apt immediately came up and said, "How do you use this delaying pain? Why is the fluctuation so small? Why can it stop the pain if it is tilted upward?" "Ah, I'm sorry, I shouldn't ask, but can you let me watch from the side?" "Sure." Greet raised her face and gave him a bright smile. One of the two was treating, the other a spectator. After the treatment of the 15th wounded soldier was completed, Gretel wiped away his sweat and spread his hands to indicate that the treatment skills were exhausted. The next moment, Bishop Ampton diligently presented a golden vial. Energy potion. Below level 5, 1 sip can replenish mental power. Greet took it with a smile and nodded to him. He then debrided and treated the wounded soldiers. While treating them, he talked to the wounded soldiers. "Your piercing is a bit deep, wait a minute, let me find a strap first and tie the upper end of your arm tightly, so that if a blood vessel is injured, blood will not spurt out. If the wound is deep, it must be cleaned thoroughly. Don't worry, I will open the wound and wipe it with a clean cloth dipped in strong liquor. Does this stop hurting? You can still feel me touching the wound, but it doesn't hurt, right?" Bishop Ampton followed him closely, wishing he could hold a notebook and write down every word of Gretel's and every step of casting spells. Gretel finished treating the last wounded soldier, washed his hands, and turned back to him with a grateful smile. "Sorry, I'm currently researching delaying pain and can't find a place to test it, so I'm sorry to bother you." "No interruption, no interruption." Bishop Ampton laughed and waved his hand. "This is the council's fleet. You are also a healer. It is a good thing to treat the soldiers. Since the fleet allows you to enter, if you need it, just come over." "That's great," Gretel laughed happily. "By the way, I still don't understand some details about the delay pain spell. You are a powerful senior healer. Can I ask you for advice?" The exchange, which was called asking for advice but was actually a discussion, continued until the evening. From that day on, Greet had an additional experimental base, a treatment center in the morning, a fleet barracks in the afternoon, and the laboratory continued to develop penicillin in the evening. After half a month, his delaying pain, anesthesia has improved by leaps and bounds. The consumption of local anesthesia within a 10*10 cm range has been reduced to the level of a level 0 magic trick. As for his P4 laboratory, the drawings of the Mage Tower were finally finalized, and 2 thick stacks were placed in front of him. The stack on the left is the basic version. There are 7 floors above ground and 2 floors underground. It is equipped with 4 elemental pools, a control room, 2 invisible servants, an alchemy laboratory, and a meditation room. Spell protection includes tower reinforcement, arcane locks, and door sealing techniques. Magic alarm, protective energy. In addition to the biological laboratory you specifically requested, it is the structure of the basic mage tower in the provinces. The Archmage of the Protection Department pushed the manuscript paper forward. Choose the normal version, and the construction costs will be borne by the council. Except for the training and assessment mentioned before, you don't have to pay anything extra. What about the page on the right? Greet looked to the side with burning eyes. Don't lie to me, you came out with 2 versions just to make me choose the more expensive one. The high-level mage tower on the right, in addition to the 4 major element pools, has added positive energy rooms and negative energy rooms, and the tower spirit level is 1 level higher. The Archmage smiled knowingly. There are 2 more protective magics, 2 more trap magics, 4 more invisible servants, and 1 more arcane garden for cultivating magic plants. Just tell me. What do you want me to do? It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 264. What do you want him to do? The great magician laughed confidently. He turned over a page of the plan in front of him and pointed his fingertips on the form. After the review meeting discussed the plan you submitted before, there were some different opinions. The Budget Committee stated that building water supply facilities, rebuilding sewers, and building infectious disease hospitals would consume too much and cannot afford such a high budget. The Ministry of Emergency Management believes that strengthening patrols and strengthening vigilance can be used to prevent spies from spreading the plague. The medical branch of the Conjuration School believes that as long as the source of the plague is blocked and it is not leaked, the city's medical power is sufficient. City Hall does not support tax increases. Greed blinked. So, does the price of getting this high-level mage tower require him to come forward to accept questioning and convince the review committee? Do you want me to speak at the hearing? When will the meeting be held? Who are the magicians I need to convince? He leaned forward slightly and asked the other person. The white-robed mage smiled slightly, raised a finger, and shook it left and right. No, 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 you have to do more than just speak. You need to convince the review committee to establish a public health agency responsible for the overall health security of Neva City, and then win the position of the head of this agency. What? Gretel was stunned. Head of a public health agency? I am a clinician. I am not in the public health field. In my previous life, although they were all majoring in medicine, they studied different majors. Students majoring in public health are not qualified to take the exam to become a practicing physician. Also, there are so many big bosses from the Church of the God of Nature, the Temple of the God of War, and the high-level mages of the medical branch of the conjuration system, and you want me to be the person in charge? Although it is my duty as a doctor, this profession is not suitable for me. I just need to convince the review committee, right? The head of the organization. Greet declined subconsciously. The white-robed mage coughed and turned another page. The positive and negative energy pools cost 5,000 contribution points each, the two trap magics each cost 2,000 contribution points, the constant secondary spell invalidation barrier and avoidance detection each cost 10,000 contribution points, and the arcane garden costs 1,000 contribution points. The tower spirit upgrade costs 20,000 contribution points. If you want to add other protection and application magic, there are corresponding prices in the table, you can check it yourself. Even if the invisible servant is given as a gift, in addition, I will give you a protective barrier from the arcane library, which can prevent insects, ants, rats, moisture, and automatically extinguish ordinary fires. You don't have much of a collection of books yet, but those experimental records are worth collecting. As he spoke, Greet calculated silently. Upgrading from the normal version to the high-end version requires a total of 50,000 contribution points. Even if he didn't spend the 10,000 points before, it would still be far from enough if he wanted to upgrade. So, gentlemen of the jury, are you waiting for me here? If you want a high-level mage tower, you have to sell yourself to the jury. Oh no, work for the jury and put up a front as a public security officer? Greet suddenly had the feeling of cleaning out 6 wallets, taking on a 30-year mortgage, and buying himself a house. He couldn't help but complain. According to the standard, a magician cannot build a magician tower by himself, right? Generally speaking, ordinary mage towers set up by the council in various cities require at least a level 5 mage to be qualified to preside over them. A mage born as a commoner who wants to have his own mage tower must save money to at least level 7, and the council has been waiting in line for several years, the archmage replied with a smile. As for the high-level mage tower, it is the one I just recommended to you. It is usually located in a county, and the magicians qualified to host it must be at least level 7 or 8. Do you want to build it yourself? If you don't rely on school, territory, or family, starting from scratch. He spread his hands. Before the veins on Gretel's forehead jumped, he leisurely added. Generally speaking, if you save enough money to reach level 11, that's pretty much it. Oh, it turns out it was really a loan to buy the mage tower. It should even be said that as a third-level magician, even if the research level is as high as the fourth level, he is eligible for a loan, thanks to the review committee's favor. Gretel thought for a moment. So, what is the annual salary contribution of the public health commissioner appointed by the review committee? The main thing is that you have to prove that there is enough necessity to establish this department. Understand, just like attracting scientific research talents, the annual salary is not important, but what research conditions and how much research funds are provided are important. As part of the research conditions, the founder of a public health institution is enough to match a high-level mage tower. How about it, can you meet this condition? The white-robed mage observed Gretel with interest. Watching this young man look happy, deep in thought, and depressed for a while, I really can't help but want to laugh. After waiting for a long time, I knocked on the table and pushed the information on the mage tower. Which one to choose? Gretel lowered his head and thought. After a moment, he raised his head and smiled. I need information. Ken. Do you have the population data, population distribution, number of births, deaths, and deaths of pregnant women and infants in Neva City? Some of them need time to sort out, but I can give them to you. Do you have a detailed map of Neva City, the underground drainage system, the commercial area, the college area, the villa area, and the civilian area respectively marked out? That's no problem, the Archmage shrugged. It's not a military map, this information is completely available. The tax records of Neva City in the past few years must be accurate to the details. Hey, that's almost enough. The Archmage began to have a headache. Given his authority, this information does not exist. It must pass the review committee's decision before it can be retrieved. Gretel doesn't care if he wants the same or two things. He wants more and more. Isn't this looking for trouble? Isn't this kid really seeking revenge? The Archmage glanced over suspiciously. Gretel rolled his eyes. Without this information, what can I give you? I still have to find a way to find an accountant. When will the GDP of a city be calculated by myself? Next year's municipal budget will be prepared by mid-December at the latest. I hope you can apply for a hearing before then to convince the members of the review committee before the meeting ended, the Archmage told Greet. Of course, the location of your mage tower has basically been decided. Tomorrow you go to the site and take a look. If there are no problems, we will start building the foundation. That. What? Gretel scratched his head. For the first time since entering the door, he showed a somewhat embarrassed smile in front of the Archmage. This mage tower belongs to me from top to bottom, right? I mean, even the land is mine, right? It won't be taken back to the Parliament after 70 years, right? Go away. If the land is not yours, do you still want to build a floating tower? Thanks to Corgi's Sheriff for the 5,000 starting coin reward. Thanks it's just the 1,500 starting coins rewarded by Lee. Congratulations to everyone for collecting another 10,000 word bonus. 6,000 words will be delivered tomorrow. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geolan 2020. Chapter 265. Greet already had a plan in mind on how to convince the review committee. However, when he actually started preparing the materials, he immediately ran into unexpected difficulties. Too much information. Not too little, but too much. Sir, do you want to retrieve the population records from past years? Facing Greet, who came to retrieve the original data with the authorization from the review committee, the clerk at the city hall had a very good attitude. He took Gretel upstairs, turned around, and reached the end of the corridor. He pushed open the database door and entered the fifth room. He stood at the door and waved in. It's all here. Just take a look, sir. Do you need me to find an office for you? Gretel. There are at least 7 or 8 rows of wooden shelves in this room, and each row of wooden shelves extends inward, 1, 2, 3, 4. Gretel has counted 10 shelves, but he hasn't counted them all yet. Each wooden frame is higher than a person's head, and there are several layers of heavy wooden boxes on top. All these are. That's right, the population records of the parliament from the past 100 years to the present are all here. How many years of records are these? Gretel took out the endless ink pen from the chest patch pocket, turned it over, and looked at the center feather pole. Under the light, he silently read the light and beautiful small words on the feather pole. 1183, Emerging Magician Award, to Gretel Nordmark. So, the data here is at most more than 1,000 years old. Gretel gasped. He grabbed the clerk and asked. Where are the records from the last 20 years, no, the last 50 years? This side near the aisle. Sir, look, there is one box for a year, and the boxes have numbers on them. In the reference room, the heavy shelves are divided into 4 levels, and each level is stuffed with a wooden box that is 40 centimeters high and more than half a meter wide. On the wooden shelf closest to the aisle, the bottom box has the words 1182 written in red paint. Gretel knelt down and dragged it, but did not drag it. I'll come, the clerk came over diligently. He bent down, grasped the copper handle on the edge of the box with both hands, said hey and pulled hard. The wooden box shook, but still did not move out of place. The clerk stepped back half a foot and pulled hard with all his strength. Ouch, my waist. He couldn't straighten up on the spot. Greet quickly went to help him. Don't move. Don't move, don't move. Come on, take this quill and put it in front of your belly button, let me take a look. Ouch, Master Mage, ouch, I'm so sorry, my old waist has something wrong again. The clerk lay on the wooden frame, supporting the wooden frame with one hand and the waist bar with the other, moaning incessantly. Greet helped him stand up slowly, pulled down one of his hands, and put the endless ink pen into his hand. Take it. Don't move. Don't talk. Endless ink pen, a level 9 magic item. It comes with its own ink, is lightweight and portable, and can be used as an X-ray by extraordinary people below level 5. It can be called a portable X-ray machine, a must-have item for surgeons when traveling at home. The X-ray magic is turned on, and the magic light passes through the body. Greet adjusted her breathing, quickly entered the meditative field of vision, and looked carefully. There is no compression fracture in the lumbar spine, and there is no slippage between adjacent vertebrae. Generally speaking, the X-ray anteroposterior and lateral plane films show no abnormalities. It should be an acute lumbar sprain. In other words, soft tissues such as waist muscles, fascia, and ligaments are restrained, or strained and torn. This disease needs to be distinguished from lumbar muscle sprain, supraspinal ligament injury, interspinous ligament injury, etc., but Greet does not have an MRI at hand. Check it out, Greet is not an orthopedic surgeon, he is really not familiar with it. Fortunately, not being able to check does not mean that there is no way to treat. Greet took a deep breath and turned on the healing technique, and warm white light seeped into the muscles. He used his mind to move the healing energy, and based on the bone position seen on X-rays, he traced the human anatomy along the way. Quadratus lumborum, lumbocostalis, lateral intertransverse lumborum, sacrospinalis. Supraspinous ligament, interspinous ligament, sacrolumbar ligament. Hey, okay. The clerk twisted his waist, moved it to the left and then to the right, with a surprised look on his face. He then bent down gratefully. Thank you, Master Mage. Thank you so much, Master Mage. Hey, it's no big deal. I'm also a healer. Remember, never bend down when moving boxes or heavy objects in the future. You must squat down like me, and then drag them out. Gretel is a piece of hygiene preaching. The clerk nodded and bowed with gratitude. He squatted down and tried to drag the box again. Holding the handle of the wooden box with one hand, raising the other hand, he inserted the endless ink pen into his chest pocket. Hey, give me back this pen. This is magic equipment, absolutely. How come civilians from another world have this problem? After such an episode, it became much easier for Greet to check the population records again. Although the clerk who guided him had a low position, he had worked in the database for more than 10 years and was familiar with everything. After learning about Greet's needs, he opened the lid of the box and gave enthusiastic advice. Hey, sir, the population information of the City Hall is divided into several parts: General Household Registration File, Household Registration Details, Family Property Details, Birth Registration, and Death Registration. General records and important family properties, mainly houses, large livestock, workshops, etc., are summarized once every 10 years. Household registration details change every year and are recorded as needed. Birth and death registration, the City Hall issues a table every week. Let me take a look. This is the stack. With a plop, a thick leather-bound book fell into his hand, causing Greet's arm to sink. So many, one thick notebook per year. If we count 20 years, how long will it take? Greet instantly felt dizzy. Led by the clerk, he sat at the small desk at the door of the warehouse and opened the register. Line after line on the briefing paper are all handwritten words. The handwriting can be neat or scrawled, and the ink has uneven shades. January 1st. 42 people died. And what? Female, 15 years old, textile worker. Address, room 219, 15, Freya Street. Cause of death, scarlet fever. Chris, female, 14 years old, textile worker. Address, room 308, 27, Freya Street. Cause of death, scarlet fever. Tom, male, 17 years old, dock worker. Address, basement, number 375 on Lugo Street. Cause of death, injury from being smashed by a wooden box, fever. Unnamed baby, female, 1 day old. Cause of death, abandoned, frozen to death. Alan, male, 15 years old, painter. Address, basement, 287 Main Street. Cause of death, chest pain. Ford, male, 3 years old. Address, Village Green. Cause of death, malnutrition. Demi Reyes, female, 14 years old, laundress. Address, 69 Clifton Street. Cause of death, dystocia. Craig Franco, male, 57 years old, businessman. Address, 28 Sydenham Street. Cause of death, stroke. Every time she read one, Greet's heart became heavier. Since traveling through time, especially since arriving in Nevis, he has been climbing up. As far as he can see, there is brightness and flowers. He had almost forgotten what it was like to be poor. The lighting, sanitation, and living facilities of the Babel Tower and the 8 auxiliary towers around it have caught up with the office buildings of the previous life. In some places, they are even worse. The magicians working there are the lowest and the lowest, formal magicians of the 2nd and 3rd levels. And after becoming a magician, even becoming a magician's apprentice, you no longer have to worry about food, clothing, or worrying about basic life. Their eyes are always looking at the stars, and their only pursuit is to explore the mysteries of this world. However, in places he did not see, in people he did not come into contact with. There are so many people suffering from poverty and disease, and so many people dying of poverty at a young age. A grain of sand of the times falls on these people and breaks their waists alive. However, should ordinary people die? Should they die if they cannot become extraordinary? So many people, So many young workers, they were not 20 years old when they died, and many of them were not 15 years old. According to the records on January 1 last year alone, the average life expectancy of workers who died, or rather, workshop workers, dock workers, etc., was less than 25 years old. As for businessmen, those wealthy people, their average lifespan is visible to the naked eye, at least 10 years longer than that of laborers. Gretel silently clenched the quill in his hand. As a doctor, even if he is a famous doctor in the world, even if he is a level 11, 15, or even legendary level healer, he can only contact the patients one by one and treat them one by one. It's not that there are no large-scale healing magics, but firstly, the cost is too high, and secondly, how many years will he have to work hard in this world to release large-scale healing magics? 20 years? 30 years? However, by becoming a public health expert and an official who can influence public health policies or even formulate policies, he will be able to help these people very quickly and immediately. It is my responsibility. It is my unshirkable responsibility as a doctor in this world. I want to prove that the establishment of public health institutions is useful. I want to help them. Clean water. Enough food. Labor protection. Cheap, even basic medical care. Even if their average life expectancy is increased by 5 years, to 30 years, 35 years. This is a protection for workers. It is also the growth of social wealth, so that they will not die young and can create wealth for the society for a longer period of time. Seize this point, I can convince the Magic Council, I will definitely do it. Greet lowered his head and wrote quickly. Under the endless ink pen, horizontal and vertical frames appear quickly on the paper. Age, gender, occupational classification, residential area, cause of death. Thank you to the Magic Council, and to a previously unknown powerful person or time traveler for establishing the rules for recording household registration, property details, and registration of survival and death. With these detailed original records, his statistics are solid enough. However, it is still a huge project to complete the statistics of these things. Looking at the 20 stacks of information on the table, each stack was as thick as a fist and already past his shoulders. Greet let out a sincere wail. Last day double period. Guaranteed monthly pass. Hand it over. And tonight from 2000 hours to 2400 hours is the last day of this month's crowdfunding monthly ticket activity. If you want to reward, please try to place it at this time. If you collect 1500 starting coins during this period, you will get 4 monthly tickets. 4 pictures. Thanks to @isgoigoi for the reward of 6500 starting coins. Thanks to @ONI who loves to play roller coasters for the reward of 1500 starting coins. Thanks to @Archangel Blazing for the 500 starting coin reward. Congratulations to everyone for collecting another 10,000 UN reward, today and tomorrow, both are 6,000 words. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, please ask for all kinds of. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 266. Greet only turned through a few pages and knew that this statistical work was far from being completed by him alone. Even adding Aurora is almost the same as not adding. On January 1st, the death toll was 42. On February 8th, the death toll was 53. On March 15th, the death toll was 47. July 6, death toll, 59. As a result of rough sampling, the number of daily deaths fluctuates between 40 and 60, which means that the annual number of deaths fluctuates between 14,000 and 20,000. If the statistical scope is expanded to 20 years, he will have to record data on at least 280,000 people and at most 400,000 people. If each person enters 7 values, year, month, gender, age range, income range, residence range, and cause of death, a total of 1.4 million to 2 million values must be processed. If Greet was a statistician or social scientist, he would probably do it slowly and spend 1, 2, or even more years sorting out the data. But he doesn't have as long as 1 or 2 years. From now until mid-December, when he requests a hearing, there is only a little more than half a month. As for the demographic work, Greet gave himself a time limit of 5 days. Gretel thought for a moment and decided to start with the basics. He rolled up his sleeves and made a form of his own. For each death information, the gender is male or female, and the age range is 0-6 years old, and every 10 years old is an interval for those over 6 years old. Income is divided into 4 ranges: low income, middle lower, middle higher, and rich. The residential areas are divided into 4 areas: slum area, small craftsman area, middle class area, and rich area. There are many causes of death, which are divided into major categories such as plague, acute disease, chronic disease, accident, suicide, dystocia, etc. Each major category is divided into several minor categories. In the dark database, Gretel was sweating while doing the forms. After finishing the work, he entered and timed it by himself. After typing 1 page, he calculated that he could only enter the information of 6 people per minute on average. In other words, if he is diligent, makes no mistakes, and maintains concentration for 8 hours a day, probably it will take about 100 to 140 days to complete the entry. Very good, that is to say, if he wants to finish the liver within 5 days, he needs 20 to 28 tabulators, that's it, not counting the manpower needed for review, supervision, and statistics. So where can he hire, no, prostitute a group of people for free? Gretel held his chin up and thought for a moment. He spread out a new piece of parchment, pulled out the endless ink pen, and began to write. Dear Master Edgar. Well, let's collect some from the Black Crow Swamp, and the Order of the God of Nature will collect another batch. Anyway, this job is not difficult, as long as you can read, draw the right words on the table, and count, that's it. Oh, by the way, you also need to be patient and conscientious. I think those who can become preparatory spellcasters should not lack this quality. Aurora went to run errands for the necromancy school, and Bernard went to Oak Ridge to run errands. In the afternoon of the same day, the two of them returned one after another, bringing replies from the 2 schools of thought. Elderwood said that it is winter, diseases are common among poor people, and the church cannot spare many people. Allocating him 10 priest apprentices to work for 5 days is already the limit. Arrive tomorrow and leave after 5 days. No one more person or one more day is allowed. Over at Black Crow Swamp, Archmage Edgar generously expressed his willingness to help him. The 20 newly recruited apprentices this year can be thrown over to work for him without any problem. Just ask Greet to remember to take some time off to teach the children anatomy. 30 people. Greet sighed leisurely. Still not enough, it would be better to have 10 more. -20 would be even better. His eyes moved around Aurora, thinking whether to go to the Archmage Carlyle himself or send Aurora to make another trip and recruit a few people from the Archmage's disciples. After much deliberation, I rummaged through the space bag and took out a volume of manuscripts. Bernard. Come with me. Let's go to the fleet barracks. Gretel met Bishop Ampton in the military camp as he wished. After sitting down and chatting for a few words, Gretel made a straightforward request: ask Bishop Ampton to help introduce the person in charge of the local temple, and lend him 10, preferably 20, priest apprentices to work for him for 5 days. This. Bishop Ampton hesitated. As a bishop of the temple of the god of war, he took a different path from the priests of his generation. After reaching level 5, he could have presided over a parish, even a small temple in a barony. However, by mistake, he was sent to cooperate with the Magic Council. From then on, he was thrown into the fleet, swimming in the wind and waves, and sleeping on the sea. In the past 10 years, the priest's level has been advanced from level 5 to level 7, and the ships following him have also changed from offshore patrols to ocean-going fleets traveling to and from the New World. However, the relationship with the local temple, apart from often visiting and praying when the fleet returns, and going back to study after advancing, there are not even a few acquaintances. He had to borrow someone to show off his face, and he also had to lend himself to the Magic Council. Bishop Apton thought to himself, it was really not such a big deal. You're not borrowing from someone empty-handed. Greet smiled and pushed the copy of the Codex over. Have a look at this battlefield first aid manual. Is it useful to the God of War Temple? Battlefield first aid. Bishop Ampton was moved. He couldn't wait to grab it and open it, to stop bleeding on the battlefield, bandage the battlefield, move the wounded, first aid for burns, first aid for drowning, first aid for snake bites. Which one is useless? Which one can't save a few dozens of lives on the battlefield? It's a rare system project that can be used to train pastors. Bishop Ampton's eyes grew brighter as he looked. Finally, he closed the manuscript and stood up suddenly. Don't worry. With this manual, not to mention bringing 20 people over to work for 5 days, even if we bring the entire temple over to help you work for a month or two, that's no problem. At 8 o'clock the next morning, Greet stood in a specially vacated conference room in the city hall, facing downwards. Aurora on the left and Bernard on the right threw out 2 sacks of blank forms to the 50 spellcasters who gathered on time. 2 people work in groups, and each group is responsible for the record book for a year. 1 person reads aloud and the other fills out the form. Another 10 people were selected, 2 from the Order of the God of Nature, 4 from the Black Crow Swamp, and 4 from the Temple of the God of War. They were responsible for supervising and checking whether the entered data was correct. Supervisors should not supervise people in their own organizations. The year and month are written at the beginning of each form. For other items, check the corresponding boxes. Do you have any other questions? A group of trainee spellcasters, the youngest in their early teens and the oldest nearly 20 years old, gathered in 3 groups and looked at each other. Although there is no direct conflict between the Order of the God of Nature and the Temple of the God of War, there is also a competitive relationship. The clergy instinctively hate the aura of death, and in the eyes of the necromancers. If you don't rely on your own strength to analyze the mysteries and embrace the lap of gods, what is that? The triangle of death, we hate each other. You must not be singled out by the God of Nature priest, war priest/necromancer. You must do it faster than them. Here you go. No problem. The 3 groups of trainee spellcasters shouted in unison. Greet sat on the podium with satisfaction. Under the podium, there are 20 tables, arranged in groups of 2, and they are getting busy. Anita, female, 24 years old, tailor. Address, 382 Bronte Street. Cause of death, smallpox. Brad, male, 18 years old, sailor. Address unknown. Cause of death, overboard while sailing. Julia, female, 22 years old. Address, Fleet Street. Cause of death, ulcer. 1 person reads and the other writes. The person reading does not need to be distracted, and the person writing does not need to raise his head. Greet saw with satisfaction that the input efficiency was more than double that of his own work. He secretly praised himself, took a sip of water, took out a magic book and started reading. However, not long after watching, the tense and harmonious atmosphere below began to collapse. The boys and girls were chattering and arguing. You filled in the wrong box. 35 years old is in the right box. You missed a line. Go back and read it again. That woman is not a rich person. Erase it and move it 2 squares to the left. What are you doing? She lives on Fleet Street, how could she not be rich? Are you out of your mind? She lives on Fleet Street, she's sore and dead, she's obviously a flower girl. How could she be a rich person? Mr. Nordmark, if you don't have an address, which box should you check? Mr. Nordmark. Mage Nordmark. Gretel, stop. Everyone stand up, move a table to the left, and move the table on the far left to the far right. Start from the beginning, read aloud, check, and see how many mistakes there are. There was another burst of chaos. Gretel got off the podium and walked back and forth between the tables, stretching his head to take a look from time to time. In less than 10 minutes, in front of the recorder responsible for verification, a large sheet of white paper had more than a dozen words positive written on it. This error rate is simply unacceptable. I was wrong. The possibility of errors in manually entering the form is too high, and it cannot be used as a statistical basis. Senior John Grant, how did you write such a masterpiece as Natural and Political Observations on Mortality in 1662 based on decades of death reports in London and purely manual statistics? Not to mention statistics, just entering data correctly is so difficult. Greet barely suppressed his sadness and watched the trainee spellcasters reading, recording, checking, and working hard. Work from 8 a.m. to 12 noon, take a 1-hour lunch break, and work from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. after dinner. Everyone was sent back to their homes. Gretel was alone looking at the record books on the table, frowning. Gretel, what's the matter? Aurora Walton sat down next to him. Greet lamented, there are too many mistakes, it can't be used like this. Then, call a few more people to check more times, let them do it slower. Gretel just shook his head. After being asked, he put his hands on the back of his head and leaned back. It would be great if it could automatically scan and enter automatically. This is not impossible. Aurora Wharton suggested cautiously. Gretel jumped up suddenly, how to do it? Which magic can do it? Well, it's not magic. The tailing sorting papers are automatically scanned and automatically assigned to destinations. I mean, you can ask if you can use the tailing to do this. Great, Gretel's whole body lit up. He grabbed Aurora and asked. Who should I apply to? What are the application conditions? Hey, I wish you had said you could use the Tower Spirit. The Tower of Babel has a special calculation room. Archmages can apply for it, I can use the teacher's authority. Aurora was shaken forward and backward by him, and her words almost broke. When it came to the last question, he hesitated all of a sudden. Then, isn't that, using the Tower Spirit is too expensive? Double period for the last 4 hours. Guaranteed monthly pass. Hand it over. The last 4 hours of crowdfunding monthly ticket campaign. If you collect 1,500 starting coins, you will get 4 monthly passes. 4 pictures. Thanks to Tangs Yao for the 100 starting coins. 6,000 words. An additional update has been completed. There's another one tomorrow. Today, I calculated these data myself. I also measured the speed of manual entry. See the pictures for the test process. I asked in the group, how many working hours does it take to input as much data as the main character does? Then, I listened to 7 or 8 group members, crying with blood and tears for a full 2 hours, about how hard it is to input data manually. It's unreliable, how tiring and frustrating it is to collect and summarize all kinds of data, even with spreadsheets, and all kinds of incredible difficulties, problems, and errors. Trembling, how did John Grant, a statistician, do it in 1662? Please subscribe. Asking for a monthly ticket. Please vote for recommendation. Please review the book. Asking for all kinds of things. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 267. Greet dragged Aurora straight to the Tower of Babel. Fortunately, he caught the last train, and fortunately, Archmage Carlyle stayed in the Mage Tower day and night. When Gretel arrived, his office was like a specialist clinic. A disciple was asking questions inside, and a group of disciples were lining up outside the door. Aurora poked her head at the door frame and looked around. Archmage Carlyle saw him at a glance, beckoned him in, asked a few questions, took out a seal, and greeted the disciple in front of him who asked questions. "Roderick, take them there. Don't be in a hurry to buy calculation time. Chat with Talling first and see if Talling can fulfill their requirements." "Okay. Don't worry, teacher, I will take good care of them." Roderick took the order and left. Some time ago, they followed Gretel Company to do several big projects, including electrolytic smelting, compressed and separated air, and everyone made a small fortune. Gretel was generous and gave them half of the research points and contribution points for the entire project. Contribution points are secondary, the most important thing is research points. That thing is so hard to earn. Following Greet, you can earn 1 or 200 points, or 2 or 300 points. It's just a matter of chance. More importantly, in the follow-up research, Greet did not restrict them at all, nor did he ask for a share. After the project was completed, several fellow students conducted in-depth research and published 2 large articles. With such a connection, Roderick became very close to Greet and the others. As he walked and explained, Greet realized that before applying for calculation, he could communicate with the tower spirit outside the computing center to ensure that the tower spirit could understand and fulfill the magician's requirements. You have to start paying when you step into the calculation room. 1,500 contribution points per hour is very expensive. It can last for a day and a half in an intermediate meditation room. No matter if there are large-scale magics to be calculated or high-level magic weapons to be designed, no one will pay. Can't afford this money. Last time, there was an unlucky guy who came from another province. He didn't know this trick and just paid for it. I burned 1,500 contribution points in vain, and Talling said it couldn't be counted at all, and I cried so miserably. Is it a reasonable price to rent? It must be expensive. Greet understood. Moreover, when renting a supercomputer, you must write a program in advance. Who would write a program temporarily when the calculation time has started? Oh, by the way, if you really want to save money, you can come in the middle of the night. Magicians have to meditate in the middle of the night, and from midnight to 6 o'clock in the morning, the calculation fee is 20% off. Hey, supercomputing, no, what about Talling's computing power, and its peak and trough prices? Who runs this computing center? The power company? I really have so much to say. After chatting and explaining all the way, we soon arrived at the computing hall on the 15th floor of the Thunder Tower. The person working the night shift in the computing center is an old man with a snow-white beard. Judging from his badge, he is only a level 5 magician. It is obvious that the council arranged for him to retire here. Roderick did not bother him, and took Gretel to the corner of the computing hall, took out the seal of Archmage Carlyle, and flashed it into the air. "Hello, dear Mr. Mage. Tailing Gregory is at your service," a vibrant young voice said cheerfully. If it weren't for the sizzling sound of electricity in his voice, Greet would have almost thought it was a living person. He coughed lightly and took the seal from Roderick's hand. "Mr. Gregory, let's apply for the use of computing power. I would like to ask, can you scan, enter, and make statistics on the existing documents?" He unfolded both documents. One is a copy of the death record, and the other is a form made during the day. The blue light shone brightly, shot down from the air, and scanned the 2 documents respectively. Gretel pointed at the form and said, "That's it, fill in each death record separately in the form, and count it as one in the corresponding column. Finally, add up the numbers in the corresponding column dash." His fingertips slid down the vertical columns. You can get the total number in each category. For example, last year, the number of deaths between 0 and 6 years old, the number of female deaths, and the number of epidemic deaths. Can it be done? There was a moment of silence in the computing hall. The blue light flickered, as if the Talling was squatting there and blinking, thinking about what Gretel meant. After thinking for 5 or 6 seconds, he said loudly, "How to classify income? According to occupation. I will give you the form later. What about residence classification? Mr. Gregory, can you call the map of Nevis and surrounding areas to determine the location of your residence? Let's go back and delineate the area on the map. Then, it can be done." "Yeah." Gretel waved his fist slightly and smiled happily. No more messing around with those apprentices, no longer having to endure manual entry and ridiculously high error rates. Data entry, storage, and calculations can all be handled by Talling. Mage Roderick coughed beside him. Gretel came back to his senses and looked at him, only to see Master Roderick gesturing and mouthing, "Money. Money. So, how long does it take to complete data entry and analysis?" Gretel came back to his senses and asked. The blue light shot down, swept across the paper line by line, and disappeared instantly. The clear voice of the tower spirit sounded. "How many pages are there in this information?" "A total of 20 years of information, one for each year, each between 700 and 800 pages," Greet recalled. Tarling quickly gave feedback. "It takes 12 seconds to scan and enter each page, 2.3 to 2.6 hours per page, 20 years, a total of..." "Stop," Greet sweated profusely. "In 2020, it was 46 to 52 hours, with 1,500 contribution points per hour. He was so bankrupt that he could no longer go bankrupt. Is it possible to scan and enter 20 books at the same time?" Another moment of quiet calculation. Talling spoke again. "It can be done. We also need to call 20 invisible servants to control page turning, the rental fee of invisible servants, and 10 contribution points per person per hour. Can I find someone to turn the pages?" "Can." Gretel breathed a sigh of relief. "It takes 12 seconds to scan and enter each page, including the page turning time, which is between 13 and 14 seconds. It takes 3.5 hours to flip through the thickest book of records, and with subsequent data processing, it takes at least 4 hours. Even if he works in the middle of the night, he must prepare at least 4,800 contribution points. However, 5 days of data were entered at once, plus the subsequent days of data sorting, and the time was compressed to 4 hours. By the way, the accuracy rate has been greatly improved. Sure enough, when it comes to doing research, is Krypton Gold the right way to go?" "Talling, how many contribution points do I have in my account now?" Greet asked aloud. The blue light scanned the badge on his chest and immediately gave the answer. 2,998 points. It was a lot more than last month, probably because the profits from selling the microscopes were recorded, but it was still not enough. Aurora saw Gretel frowning in deep thought and touched him carefully. "Hey, I still have 1,500 contribution points here, which are yours too. You can use them. If it's not enough, can we find a way to borrow some?" "What can I borrow?" Gretel took a deep breath. "When doing research, you should spend research funds, never out of your own pocket." The next day, he asked Aurora to take charge of the entry work, and he asked to see the review committee member of the Department of Protection. With the record book in the left hand and the table in the right hand, after stating my research ideas, I confidently made the request. "Grant the right to use computing power. Or, Additional project funding. Authorized to use the computing room, the white-robed mage shook his head repeatedly. The Parliament does not have this rule. Gretel, you have to know that almost all high-level mages are responsible for the research tasks of the Parliament. If you hold the Parliament's projects, you can use the calculation room at will. The result will definitely be that everyone will huddle together, and in the end we can only rely on robbing. What about additional project funding? Greet asked. The white-robed mage continued to shake his head. Generally speaking, it's possible, but Greet, I don't know yet whether your project will be successful or not. It's basically impossible to convince the reviewers that you'll overdraw such a large sum of money. That. Gretel was a little anxious. To be honest, no one who has tasted the taste of Krypton gold wants to go back to the era of hard work and life-threatening. Besides, if you process data manually, accuracy and time efficiency are both issues. The white-robed mage smiled. But it's not impossible. You can advance the payment yourself first. If the public health institution is successfully established, I will be sure to convince the review committee to include the calculation cost in the research funding, and then we will reimburse it together. No money. You can get a loan. The white-robed mage smiled confidently. The Magician Management Department has a special loan institution. A loan of 5,000 contribution points, well, you can borrow more, is designated for this research project. If the project is successful, the council will pay for it. If the project is unsuccessful, you will repay it at your own expense. The evaluation committee will issue a certificate, and if you take it to the management department, they will definitely lend it to you. Isn't the council worried that I can't afford the repayment? Gretel couldn't help but complain. I'm really not worried. The Dragon's Breath hand alone is not open for redemption right now. Once it is open, it will only take half a year to reach 5,000 contribution points. The white-robed mage shrugged and did not want to explain to Gretel in detail. He just smiled and said, "Can you use your mage tower as a mortgage?" Well, it doesn't matter if the repayment period is longer. Let it be 3 years. The interest-free period is half a year. The repayment will start after 1 year. The annual interest rate is 5%, this condition. Isn't that considered bullying you? Use the mage tower that has not yet been built and only exists on the drawing board as collateral, it is very good and powerful. Except for the members of the review committee, probably no one can approve this kind of policy loan. Gretel lowered his head and thought for a moment, then raised his palm. Make a deal. Make a deal. With a snap, the palms of the two mages struck together in the air. It is impossible not to pay back the loan. I will definitely win this project, even for the workers who died of poverty and illness, I will definitely win it. In order for the data to be accurate, to be convincing, and to be able to help them as soon as possible. Let's spend money first. At midnight that night, 20 necromancer apprentices lined up in a square formation, each holding a record book, and stood in the calculation room of Thunder Tower. Everyone, please pay attention. The blue light flashes twice to indicate that the scan is complete. Just turn the page and wait for the blue light to flash again. 1, 2, 3. Start. Today there are another 6,000 words, 3,000 at noon and 3,000 at night, but after finishing today, it will be paid off with rewards and updates. Thanks to @bookfriend 2018120510451174 for the reward of 500 starting coins. Thanks to @bookfriend 2017051716593054 for the reward of 100 starting coins. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews, please ask for all kinds of. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 268. 3 o'clock in the morning. 20 necromancers staggered around. Most of the people had already finished flipping through the record books in their hands and were lying on the table with their heads buried in the crooks of their elbows. The remaining 2 unlucky ones were trying hard to hold up their eyelids and follow the rhythm of the flashing blue light, turning pages and pages. Page, turn page. Greet was also about to fall asleep. Unfortunately, since time traveling, he has basically stopped staying up late. Spellcasters need enough sleep. Otherwise there will be no magic or magic tomorrow. Even if they are adventuring in the wild, a fool would only let a spellcaster stay up late if it is absolutely necessary. Over the past year or so, his ability to stay up late, which he developed in the emergency department, has almost completely deteriorated. Finished. The last page. Even the cry that the work is done is weak. Greet came back to his senses, tried to push himself up from the table, and raised his voice. Thank you for your hard work. On the 7th floor of Thunder Tower, I have arranged guest rooms for you. You can take the time to get some sleep. I will express my gratitude to Archmage Edgar. The necromancer apprentices staggered and filed out. Gretel seized the last hour, spread out the form on the table, and made a request to Tailing. Mr. Gregory. No matter the year, every age group, the number and percentage of deaths. A blue light fell. Then, the ink in the bottle automatically rose into the air, and numbers were filled in line by line on the form. Specifically, for each year, the number of deaths in each age group, and the percentage. Swipe, 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 20 consecutive forms, all filled out. A spell like Scribe directly retrieves the numbers from the documents stored in the tower spirit and accurately fills them in the grid on the paper. Finally, a secret mark was added in the corner of the form. It is produced by Tailing and must be a high-quality product. The number and proportion of deaths in various age groups and genders. Number and proportion of deaths by cause of death. Sex ratios for each cause of death. Average life expectancy by income group. Greet racked his brains and tongue. He asked Tailing to calculate every statistical method he could think of, not counting it in vain. It was not necessarily the case that after copying the numbers, he went back and pressed the calculator himself. Besides, in this other world, there are no calculators available. A thick stack of forms has been filled out, and the wall clock in the calculation room is already pointing to 3:55. Greet put away the form and walked out of the calculation room. The hall was empty, and the old magician on night shift had fallen asleep on the table, snoring heavily. There was no one in the aisles and elevators. Except for the invisible servant holding a broom and sweeping the floor, the entire Thunder Tower seemed to have fallen asleep. For some reason, a question suddenly popped up in Gretel's mind. Have you ever seen the Mage Tower at 4 in the morning? Now, I can finally say that I have seen it. Not only have I seen the Mage Tower, I have also seen the city of Nevis at 4 in the morning. Greet strolled to the edge of the top of the mountain and looked down. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the whole city was still sleeping, and everything was dark. However, at the foot of this dark mountain, there are already little lights that are lighting up. Gretel watched in rapt attention. Some bright spots are far away on the seashore. Perhaps the fishermen are preparing their sails and fishing nets, preparing to go fishing at dawn? Some highlights are in the southeast corner of the city. When I memorized the map, I remembered that there were many workshops gathered there. Were they ready to start work before dawn? There are also bright spots moving on the streets in the city, or moving from outside the city to the city. What are they doing? Bring vegetables, meat, milk, clean drinking water to the city? Or transport the filth accumulated in the city last night out of the city? Spellcasters have the right to sleep soundly at night, but in this city, in this world, many people do not have the right to do so. He stood quietly on the edge of the mountain. Eagle Peak is the highest peak in the kingdom. Standing on the top of the mountain, you can overlook the bay to the west and all the mountains to the east. No mountain can block its sunshine. At around 5 o'clock in the morning, the sky turned white, and then a ray of red light jumped from the mountains, illuminating Gretel's bright eyes. In this world, even the sunshine is enjoyed by magicians earlier than ordinary people. Greet took a deep breath of the icy mountain breeze. He refreshed and looked at the two followers who were yawning as they walked out of the tower side by side. Bernard. Aurora. Let's go. Let's take a good look at the city and see how its middle, lower and bottom floors work. Nevis, the city of mages. This city is centered on the Magic Council, and everything either serves mages or has mages as its core productivity. When you get off the train, you can see garden villas on the left-hand side. Greet and Aurora's residences are also in this area. Greet looked at the evergreen vegetation outside the villa and suddenly asked, Aurora. Where does the water used in the villa area come from? He really hadn't noticed this problem before. There seems to be running water in the house. Anyway, whether it is a sink or a bathtub, water comes out as soon as he turns the faucet. But where does that water come from? Magic circle. Aurora answered matter-of-factly and even gave Gretel a strange look. Most of the people who can buy a house in the villa area are magicians. Who can't get a magic circle that can create water? Even if you are not a magician and can afford to buy a house, you can buy it with the magic circle. Oh. Greet patted her thigh lightly. He was previously focused on the water plant. But this is a magical world. The Mage Tower is directly equipped with a water element pool. Rich people install magic arrays and magical arrays. They have no demand for centralized water supply and clean water supply. Not only here, Aurora's explanation continued, it's just across the street. He raised his arm and waved vigorously. To the right of the train station is the most upscale commercial street in Nevis, with theaters, high-end restaurants, jewelry stores, antique shops, etc., all of which are dazzling and magnificent at first glance. They also use magic circles. Otherwise, how could the magicians be willing to enter? Gretel was silent. He reined in his mount and stared for a long time at the golden round dome of the theater, and at the smooth bluestone street in front of him without a single seam. Obviously, such a road can only be made of fossils turned into mud. Turning mud into the stone is shaped into shape, staring at the thin grass on both sides of the street. Under the blades of grass, the sound of water gurgled. It was obvious that there were non-open drainage channels under the road. In this area, residents have the highest income and the highest average life expectancy, reaching 59 years old. It is conceivable that if the servants of the mansion were not included and only the masters were counted, the average life expectancy would be even higher. Gretel looked confused. He raised his gaze and cast his eyes to the endless distant sky, then slowly moved down, as if overlooking the entire city from the top of Eagle Peak. Then take a breath and exhale forcefully. Oro, let's go look elsewhere. Pass through the core business district and bypass the Bridge School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Greet had already memorized the city map by heart, and he went straight to the east side of the city without anyone guiding him. The further you walk, the dirtier it becomes. Not long after walking, I stepped from the magically shaped road to the stone road, and then from the flat stone road to the uneven stone road paved with large rough rocks. Aurora had carefully gathered her robe, fearing that a little mud would be splashed on her magic robe, but Greet frowned slightly and looked around, showing no intention of turning around and leaving despite the environment. His eyes were piercing, as if he wanted to carve every detail around him deeply into his heart. By this time they had passed the center line of the city. Nevis is a seaside city that naturally grows into a U-shape along the bay. Crossing the end of the bay, which is the bottom of the U-shape, heading east, you will enter the periphery from the core area of the city. There are walls connected to the walls along the road, and the houses inside are all tall and large, far exceeding what is needed for residential use. The chimneys are spewing smoke of various colors, black, yellow, white, red, and so on. As soon as the wind blew, a sour, smelly, and strange smell suddenly hit their heads and faces. Greet conveniently used a bubble technique on himself. What does this smell like? Wine? Aurora shrugged. He also sells wine at home, so it's not as big a reaction as Greet's. Maybe he's pouring out the dregs of the wine grains. This workshop is quite big, so it probably takes a while. Where are they pouring? Greet asked. He quickly shut up. Two men came out of the side door of the workshop. They were both shirtless in the winter, and their upper bodies were steaming. The two of them worked together to carry a large wooden barrel, knocked it over with force, and poured it into the river next to it with a splash. Pour directly into the river. Gretel couldn't believe his eyes. Aurora spread her hands. What else? Oh, it doesn't matter. Anyway, it won't happen if you just rush into the sea. Why not? The pollution is very serious. Okay. Just as Greet was about to argue, a door on the other side of the river opened, and a wooden barrel poured out. Dark blue water soaked through the ground and flowed directly into the river. After a while, the gurgling river turned half indigo and half turbid yellow, looking strange and disgusting. Opposite is the dyeing shop. You see, the lease is pretty good. Without saying a word, Gretel reined in his horse and ran downstream. Following the river, he saw the blood and viscera dumped by the slaughterhouse, the tanning materials dumped by the leather workshop, and the pig manure dumped by the pig farm. The further down, the more stinky and unpleasant the river became, and finally, all kinds of filth it sinks and floats. You can even see it with the naked eye. So, where does the water they drink come from? Aurora didn't know how to answer. Gretel rode around in a circle, but could not find the well. The three-story buildings on the roadside stand next to each other. The houses have flat structures and are extremely cramped. You can reach out and hold each other's hands between the buildings. Gretel looked up for a while, then jumped off the horse, intending to go in and find someone to inquire. Just after taking a few steps, there was a crash next to me. Aurora was quick-sighted and immediately set up a shield to block most of the basin of sewage. However, the shield was only a flat surface after all, not an all-round isolation. Gretel's trousers and shoes on his right leg were soaked in an instant. Oh, Lord Mage, have mercy on me. Lord Mage, have mercy on me. The washerwoman who splashed water knelt down, her face turned pale. Gretel looked down at her, waved his hand, and planned to avoid the matter. Before he could even lift his foot, a black-faced man came out of the door and kicked the washerwoman. Old whore! I blinded you. How dare you offend the mage? He kicked and cursed, kicking her several times at once, causing the washerwoman to roll all over the floor. The washerwoman huddled up in a ball, whining, not even daring to run away. Greet was startled by him, stunned for a moment, and finally reacted. Stop. Master Mage, look at this dash. Don't hit her. Greet breathed out and waved his hand. He didn't even look at the black-faced man. He bent slightly and faced the washerwoman on the ground. Take me in and help me wash and dry my pants and shoes. Can you dry them here? That's the end of the matter. Don't worry, I won't make you pay. Did you hear that? Accompany the mage in quickly, the black-faced man shouted again. The washerwoman curled up on the ground and looked up at him, then looked at Gretel. Her face was pale, and she finally moved forward step by step and carried the tub in. Aurora had a strange expression on her face and hesitated to speak, but she did not stop Gretel and allowed him to follow the peasant woman. Walking through a dark corridor, bending down to get through the wet clothes and bed sheets hanging on the corridor, Gretel couldn't help but ask. Are you there yet? Half of his legs were soaked, and they made a squeaking sound when he stepped on them. Gretel felt terribly uncomfortable. It doesn't matter if the place is narrower or the house is smaller, just dry him quickly. It's almost there, it's almost there. Master Mage, right in front. Master Mage. Suddenly a little head appeared in front of him. The peasant woman's voice suddenly rose to a higher pitch, her tone was frightened and almost broke. Jenny. Go back. 3,600 words. Got another update. The extra update is finally finished. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 269. Greet looked around. The little girl who appeared in the room looked less than 10 years old. She was skinny and had dull, curly brown hair. But what first caught Gretel's attention was the girl's yellow face and her little hands, which were also yellow and dark, resting on the doorframe. You. He spoke subconsciously. As soon as she started, the little girl jumped in surprise and shrank back like a little rabbit. The washerwoman turned around and stood in front of Gretel, bending down deeply. Her smile was uglier than her tears. Master Mage, please, please, the room is over there. She stretched her arms and pointed tremblingly at the other end of the corridor, like a female quail trying to spread its wings to block the bulldozer. Greet raised her hand to interrupt her. Etc. He looked intently into the room. Looking in the direction where the little girl disappeared, looking at the unusually yellow face that disappeared from sight. You call her out. Let me see her. Master Mage. Just scream when I ask you to. The black-faced man pushed the washerwoman away. The woman staggered 2 steps and hit the wooden wall next to her with a loud clang. The black-faced man didn't care and strode into the room. Hey, don't dash! Gretel shouted from behind. The black-faced man had already brought out a little girl who was screaming, kicking and beating. He threw a trick in front of Gretel, bent down and smiled in apology. Master Mage, this is the child. Don't do anything to them. Greet waved her hand. He knelt down, eye level with the little girl, and spoke as softly as possible. Little sister, your name is Jenny, right? Don't be afraid. I am a healer. There seems to be something wrong with your face. Let me see you dash. He reached out his hand. Jenny desperately shrank back, leaned against the washerwoman, and was hugged by her mother. Greet held her little face and looked at her, then used a flash technique to observe her eyes with white light. It's strange, these sclera are not yellow either? Little sister, open your mouth and let me take a look. Ah. The girl shrank and pursed her lips tightly. Aurora bent down, squatted behind Gretel, and asked him in a low voice. What are you looking at? Her face and hands are strangely yellow. If she is sick, the whites of her eyes should be more yellow, but the whites of her eyes are normal. Greet pondered and hesitated, partly explaining to Aurora and mostly talking to himself. When he saw the little girl just now, he thought she had jaundice. However, jaundice causes yellowing of the skin and mucous membranes, which first appears in the sclera, the back of the hard palate, and the mucosa of the soft palate. Only when the degree deepens does the yellowing of the skin appear. Could it be that he saw it wrong? Speaking of which, he was indeed not too familiar with Wei Quarren's symptoms. While she was thinking hard, Aurora snorted behind her. Oh, it's died. He stretched out his hand and a slight spell wave passed over the girl's head and face. Mage's trick cleaning technique. In an instant, the yellow color faded away, the stains disappeared, and everyone's eyes suddenly lit up. Nestled in her mother's arms was a pretty little girl with azure eyes, smooth blonde hair, and delicate facial features. Even if she is so thin that her cheeks are sunken, she can still tell that she is a beautiful woman. A face like this, in a slum like this, would bring trouble. The washerwoman's face instantly turned pale. She bent down and hugged her daughter's head and face, as if this would make her daughter invisible. Greet sighed slightly, stretched out her hand to stop the black-faced man, and allowed the washerwoman to hold her daughter into the room, then she followed him in. Judging from the facilities in the room, it was probably the residence of mother and daughter. It was steamy and full of clothes that had been washed and waiting to be ironed. There were 2 or 3 large wooden basins placed on the ground. As soon as the little girl entered the room, she automatically squatted down to the edge of the wooden basin in the corner, turned her back to them, and began to wash vigorously. Gretel pointed a finger, and a sheet flew up, and the void spread out, covering the little girl behind. The washerwoman breathed a sigh of relief, and Greet hung up another sheet for herself, then sat behind the sheet, took off her shoes and socks, and let the washerwoman wash them quickly. He chatted with her pleasantly through the curtain. "How much money can you make by washing a piece of clothing like this? Look at the size, the big one costs a copper penny, and the small one costs 5 copper penny, and you have to give the boss a commission. How much can you earn that day?" Greet frowned. "Is the boss the same man just now?" "One day, a little bit 5 coppers, but bad luck, only 3. The boss is him, he takes the work and divides it among us." Gretel frowned. He still remembered that when he was in Heartland City, a loaf of black bread cost him 1 copper, which was enough for him to eat for a day. There are 2 mothers and daughters in front of them. Is a loaf of black bread enough for them? Look at this, the house may not be theirs, they still have to pay rent and buy charcoal for ironing clothes. By the way, what do you do with your usual meals? Do you cook them yourself? Where do you get the water? Just, in the river next to it. Just that messy smelly river? Even if there is no plague, that kind of river water can knock down healthy people in minutes. Greet's face suddenly turned as ugly as possible. Hearing his silence, the washerwoman became even more afraid to speak. She lowered her head and ironed her shoes and socks, then brought them to Greet through the curtain, then took his pants and went over to clean them. As soon as the clothes were soaked in the water, the wooden door bounced open with a bang, and a high-top leather boot covered with mud stepped in, almost stepping on the water basin. "Laura, when will you pay back the money you borrowed from me half a year ago?" The washerwoman shrank reflexively. Before she could raise her head, she threw herself down to protect the basin, then raised her head tremblingly. "Mr. Robert, pay it back next month." "I will definitely pay it back next month." "Definitely," the visitor sneered. "You already owe me 15 silver coins." 15. "If you don't pay me back this month, the interest will be compounded, which is 2 gold coins. How much money can you get from washing clothes for a month? If you don't pay it at the end of the month, you will get it from my get out of the house." "Mr. Robert," the washerwoman's voice was panicked. The man walked a few steps in the room and suddenly laughed. "Forget it, I, Robert, am also a kind-hearted person and will not push you to death. How about, you give little Jenny to me and I will introduce her to a job. She is good-looking and knows a few people. You should be able to get a good price for the words." "Mr. Robert!" The washerwoman screamed miserably. The heavy footsteps kept coming, heading towards the corner of the house. For a moment, there was a soft cry of surprise from the corner, followed by the sound of the water basin overturning, kicking, struggling, and calls for help. "Mom! Mom! Mom! Oro, tell him to stop!" Boom 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 boom. Aurora lifted the curtain and came out, using a series of magic missiles to directly blow away the uninvited guests. After a while, there were only 2 mages left in the room. They lowered their heads slightly and looked at the mother and daughter hugging each other. "Little sister, are you literate?" Greet said softly. The washerwoman hugged her daughter tightly and lowered her head tremblingly. "Why yes, I taught her a little bit. It is really rare for 2 people to be literate in this world where the average literacy rate is impressive." Gretel did not ask why the woman was literate. He lowered his body and tried to make himself smile more friendly. So, how about you two coming to work at my house? I bought a new house, and I just need a maid to take care of it. It's not that difficult to open a hospital in another world, right? Author, Geoland 2020. Chapter 270. Mr. Nordmark. Your tea. Ah, okay, thank you little Jenny. Greet came back to his senses, took the teacup and took a sip, then jumped back to the map. Freya Street, Anlo Street, Main Street, Clifton Street, Sydenham Street, Follett Street, Garden Avenue, Green Village, Wolf Village, Penis Village. Cities, rural areas, high-end residential areas that collect water with magic arrays and magical arrays, mid to high-end residential areas that have water delivered by dedicated personnel, middle and low-level residential areas that get water from wells, slum areas that get water from smelly ditches. In the past few days, he personally traveled throughout the city of Nevis, and based on his own visits and memories, he marked different water sources on the map. From point to line, from line to surface, I will go to Thunder Tower tomorrow and ask Tailing to calculate the mortality rate in different regions. Well, there are also mortality rates in different regions and different causes of infectious diseases. After he marked 20 streets, when he turned around, little Jenny was still standing quietly 2 meters behind, looking at the desk with eyes full of longing. Greet stopped writing. Little Jenny, what's the matter? First, sir, the little girl held the tea tray with both hands, her thumbs pressed tightly against the edge of the wooden tray, and her nails turned a little white. She murmured a few times, and when she saw Gretel looking at her with a smile, without any impatience in his eyes, she finally struggled to speak. Sir, I have finished my work for today. Can I borrow a book to read? Don't worry, I will be very, very careful not to get it dirty at all. I will put it back as soon as I finish reading it. Greet smiled slightly. Speaking of which, it was also his responsibility for the matter to come to this point. If he had not misjudged that the little girl had jaundice, insisted on checking, and finally lost the disguise made by the girl's mother, the creditor would probably not have robbed her even if he came to collect debts. And now that they have taken action, the little girl and the washerwoman will not be able to stay where they are. He had no choice but to help to the end. As for the mother and daughter, they were both literate, which was an unexpected surprise. Okay. Little Jenny, you can read all the books in the bottom row of the bookshelf on the left. You can also take them back to your room to read. You can only read one book at a time. After reading, remember to come back. Work hard. Thank you, sir. The little girl bowed, carefully took out a book, and put it into the pocket of her apron. Then he bowed again, holding the tea tray, and left the study in small steps. His steps were light and almost silent. Greet returned to work with a smile. After sorting out the population data, death rate, and birth rate, he quickly dived into tax records. Calculation, statistics, evaluation. 5 days later, Greet was full of confidence and made a request to the review committee to open a hearing. The hearing was held at City Hall at the foot of the hill. Not everyone can enter the Mage Tower, especially the top of Igor Peak, the Tower of Babel and the 8 auxiliary towers shrouded in mystery. The powerful magic power surges. If ordinary people stay for a long time, they will suffer irreversible health damage. Therefore, the big bosses of the jury rarely condescended and went to the City Hall in person to preside over this debate. Because of the arrival of the big boss of the review committee, the City Hall opened a conference hall with the highest specifications and the largest scale. As soon as Greet stepped into the hall, he saw 8 jury members facing the door of the conference hall, sitting high on the rostrum. When they saw him coming in, most of the committee members had serious faces and pretended to turn a blind eye. There is a wide discussion table in front of the rostrum. On the left side of the discussion table, There are 5 rows of benches from low to high, filled with dozens of people. Among them were knights with serious faces and straight backs, spellcasters wearing robes and mage badges, and some people with luxurious clothes and big bellies. They glanced at the rostrum, obviously a little nervous. Merchant. Clerk. Still. Gretel just took a glance and was led to the bench on the right. The 5 identical rows of benches on the right were empty. After Gretel sat down, he turned to the left and saw Aurora Warden. Turning to the right, Bernard the Barbarian. Well, in terms of debating, the Barbarian can't be considered a fighting force. He and Aurora are the only 2 people who talk to each other and debate with dozens of people on the opposite side. Not to mention the difficulty, you can already imagine how much work your throat has to do today. Greet touched his throat, quietly threw a shot to treat minor injuries, and moisturized his own throat first. White light flashed at his fingertips, and he immediately saw many envious glances from the crowd opposite. Oh, he's not an extraordinary person, no wonder. However, as an ordinary person, he could actually sit with the spellcaster and influence the committee's decision. He could not overestimate the power and financial resources of these people. In front of the great mages of the judging panel, don't capsize. Gretel touched his waist bag, and his fingertips touched the stacks of information in the space bag, finally feeling relieved. The next moment he stood up quickly, there was a roar on the podium, and there was a sound of chair legs dragging the floor. The Archmage also stood up collectively, looking forward, smiling and nodding. Greet turned sideways to the door and bowed slightly. Elderwood smiled at him, walked into the conference hall first, and sat down in the spectator seats. Immediately afterwards, the Archbishop of the local God of War temple, Bishop Ampton, an unknown high-ranking cleric of the Spring Temple, filed in and sat down side by side. The Archbishop of the Temple of the God of War also nodded to Gretel and smiled cordially. After all the priests entered the arena, there was a cacophony of footsteps, and another group of people entered the arena. One of them was upright and heroic. It was the female knight Selina Gretel had dealt with, the eldest daughter of the Earl of Inverness and the Countess of Roche. It seems that this group is all nobles. Gretel and the female knight looked at each other. Selina raised her chin slightly and waved her finger at him slightly. After the nobles took their seats, a group of businessmen came in, noisy and mixed, filling the back rows of the auditorium. The door of the conference hall slammed shut. In front of the discussion table, a clerk wearing a black robe and white shoulder-length curly hair rang the bell and raised his voice. Regarding Master Greet Nordmark's request to allocate special funds to establish a public health institution, the special hearing will begin now. Gretel. Familiar with it, I have never applied for this before. He quickly looked towards the podium. On the rostrum, the great magician of the protection department smiled slightly and made a gesture to him. Come on. If you win this debate, you will be the first person in charge of the public health agency. Now, please make statements from all parties on the necessity, feasibility, and budget of establishing a public health institution. The clerk raised his left hand and lifted it upward. Opposite Gretel, a magician wearing dark blue robes with 3 silver stars on his badge stood up. As soon as he spoke, Gretel's face turned dark. I think the current treatment power in Neva City is enough to meet the needs of the whole city. There is no need to build other institutions. Thanks to Ed for the 1,500 starting coin reward. Please subscribe, ask for monthly tickets, ask for recommendation votes, ask for book reviews. I haven't read much recently, and there are very few new readers coming in. Please comfort meow meow.